ActiveCampaign and or segmentation. In this video, we're going to talk about how to use the capability that ActiveCampaign provides for segmenting based on and, or. Now, I'll be honest, this can be challenging. And if you get one thing from this video, it should be this slide right here. And my recommendations are keep positive and negative logic separate from each other. And, which is an all condition, is easier to understand than or, which is a one or more condition. Positive logic is easier to understand than negative logic. Negative logic has not. And make sure you spot check your results when you set up a segmentation to make sure it makes sense. Now, negative logic, the way you note that is it has not in it. So for instance, all of the things I show under all option actions, for instance, not in list has not opened, that's negative logic. And positive logic does not have not. So we're going to dive in, go through some examples and work our way up to actually some useful ones so you can understand why I'm suggesting what I do. Now, here's the scenario. We're just going to map out something where a person can have temp A or a temp B tag or both or none. And so I've printed all the scenarios there, and then we're going to make some segments and see how they work. So first one is simply, does the temp A tag exist? Now in this scenario, there's two people that meet that, person 3 and person 4. Here's one where it's, does the temp B tag? And yes, two people again, except they're different. Person 2 has the temp B tag, person 4 does. Now it doesn't matter what else they have, it's do they have this specific tag? Now here's negative logic, does not have. And again, two people, except they're the opposite people of the ones that have the temp A tag. It's person 1, person 2 do not have temp A. Here's does not have temp B, and that would be person 1 and person 3 do not have that tag. Now, here's where we get into using and or. In this case, it's and, which I think is easier to understand. What we're looking for here is somebody or somebodies that have both tags, both temp A and temp B. And in this case, there's only one person, person 4, that has that. This is or logic. It's one or more. So we're looking for somebody that has at least one of those tags, either temp A or temp B or both. And 3 of the 4 do. Person 2, 3, and 4 have that condition. Now, here is negative logic with and. So we're looking for somebody that doesn't have temp A and they don't have temp B. Well, there's only one person that meets it. That's person 1, because everybody else either has one of those tags or both of those tags. Now, here's the scenario I don't recommend you do. However, it works. It just gets a little tricky. If there's an alternative way to implement this, I would recommend it, and I'll show you a scenario where this happens. So we're saying we want a person that does not have temp A tag or they don't have temp B tag. So 3 of the 4 people meet that situation or that requirement. Person A doesn't have temp A tag. Person 1 doesn't have temp A or temp B. Person 2 doesn't have temp A and person 3 doesn't have temp B. So they meet the requirements. A little bit harder to follow that logic than using and. Now, I do not recommend this, even though it totally works, makes sense, because you can have a more complicated segment requirement and you would have to break this and rebuild it. So why not just start right from the beginning? However, if we just read the logic here, it says, okay, you have to have temp A, but you can't have temp B. And there's only one person that meets that, and that's person 3. Again, don't do it like this, do it like this. Basically break it up into 2 chunks within a segment, and you can do this in ActiveCampaign. It's still the same thing, still meets the same requirements, they're separate. If we were to add more requirements, we're going to keep all the positive logic stuff together and all the negative logic stuff together. And guess what? Here we go. So we've got 3 different tags. And I've added more people to show all scenarios. Not that we have to go through every single person, every single scenario, but in this case, we're saying you have to have all 3 tags. And guess what? There's only one person that meets that requirement. Now the next one's the or. It's one or many. The only person that doesn't meet that requirement is person 1 because that person doesn't have any of those tags, but everyone else has at least one of those tags or more. And then here's and with negative logic. So we have to make sure a person meets all these requirements. They don't have either A, B, or C. And again, there's only one person that does that, and that's person 1 in this case. Again, don't recommend this one, but it is possible to do it. So if there's an alternative way, I would recommend doing it. So this is an or scenario with negative logic. A person doesn't have the temp A tag, or they don't have the temp B, or they don't have the temp C. That means they could have the temp C tag, but not the temp B tag. And the majority of the people meet this requirement. Only one person doesn't. That's person 8 who happens to have all of those tags. So think about it. The alternative way to create this is to say somebody that has all 3, that would be a yes and everyone else is a no. And I'm going to show you how to use that shortly here. And actually here it is right here. So these two effectively do the exact same thing. They do it from a different logic perspective and then a different layout in the automation. So if you look at the bottom left, that's kind of the negative logic with an or. That's kind of the worst case in my opinion. And it basically says if they meet these requirements, put them down the yes path and they will get an email. Now, on the other hand, on the right, we've got the and with positive logic, which is much easier to understand. If you meet the requirements, you still go down the yes path. Guess what? You're not the one getting the email. The people on the right-hand side or the no path is what's going to get the email. Again, the results are identical in terms of who gets the email. The logic that was used to implement this is, I'm going to just say 180 degrees different. I find it much easier to understand the positive logic and the and logic on the right than on the left. Because on the right, we're basically looking for one very specific conditions. However, on the left, it's almost like a double negative, does not exist, or this one doesn't exist. I'll let you decide which one makes sense to you. Now, let's just go to another level. This is a real scenario. This is something people might want. And the way this reads is, we've got two sections here in this segment. The one is the positive logic with an or, and the bottom is the negative logic with the and. And we've got 16 different combinations that you could possibly have. Now, here's where I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with the bottom one because it has and, which I find easier than or. And if I had to choose between positive and negative logic or and or, I would start with the and or, then go to the positive negative choice. So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to look at the conditions for just this one right here. It says you have to have no for temp C and you cannot be on the list. So basically anyone that has no here and no here is a maybe. And there it is. So there's 4 people that are maybes, 4 conditions, if you will, that are maybes. And by extension, that means all the other options are no. They're not possible. So we're basically down to 4 people that we then have to compare to our top section to see if they meet. And what this says is, does temp A exist or temp B? Either one, doesn't matter. So the first one is a no. So we're going to have to put no there. And guess what? All the others are yes, because yes, it has B, yes, this has A, and yes, this has A and B. So that is the scenario or the logic that would be met based on this. So again, I'm going to suggest you keep positive and negative logic apart, which I've done here. And is easier to understand than or, so start with this. Positive logic is easier to understand than negative logic, but because we are starting with this, that kind of overrides this. But if it was just a positive versus negative logic selection, I would start with positive. So that's ActiveCampaign and/or segmentation.